who are doing these jobs. And this has led people to try and figure out, okay, like how can I just run my business more efficiently? How can I do more with less? And usually the answer to that is centralization. And leasing teams in particular are under a lot of pressure today when folks are trying to lower their operating expenses in face of rents not rising as much as they used to. And leasing teams are typically responsible for a whole bunch of different functions, right? They're touring people when they come by the property. They're often responsible for renewals. If any tenant has an issue or a maintenance problem that can't be resolved through an online portal, they go to the site teams. And then they're also expected to do application processing. And application processing and screening is really like the job of a bank underwriter. It's actually a very challenging thing to do. You not only need to understand how to measure financial risk, you have to understand how to read consumer financial documents like bank statements or pay stubs, and you have to be a fraud detective because fraud has become such a huge problem. And to expect teams to be able to do all of that well amidst all of their other responsibilities is just unrealistic. And that's part of the reason why industry average bad debt has gone from 0.5 or 0.6% pre-COVID to over 1% today. And usually operating expenses, if you break them out and you take out the slice that is just payroll, that's often about 25%, between 21 and 25% of the operating expenses of these businesses. So if you can figure out a way to reduce some of that payroll expense, it's actually going to be a very big driver in making your property management business profitable. Again, another reason why centralization has been such a focus. That said, centralization has traditionally been very hard. So what has centralization looked like in the past? There are some NMHC top 50 and top 10 folks who have successfully centralized screening. And usually what that looks like is you maybe get rid of the assistant manager position and you take all of those functions in special centralized teams. But it's an 18-month or a 2-year process where you're building a new team, you're building a new process, you're hiring new people, you're probably running a pilot in a small subset of properties, and it's just very challenging. Anytime you are doing sort of massive change management in a multi-hundred or multi-thousand person organization, it's a big struggle and it just takes a lot of time. And for the folks that have been able to achieve it, like some of our NMHC top 10 partners, the success is great, the lower costs are great, you can achieve far better outcomes in screening, such as higher occupancy and significantly lower bad debt. But many people feel like it's kind of too daunting to get there. Now, it used to be basically impossible to automate work end to end. But now there are software systems and solutions that you can buy that are actually able to completely solve problems. So rather than centralization being something where you have to figure out how you're going to build a whole series of teams that do these functions, and that's a sort of 18-month, 2-year change management process, you can instead use technology to automate the process end to end. And in the case of screening, what this essentially looks like is some sort of system which is just delivering you approvals and denials that are better than the current approvals and denials you're getting with a combination of multiple systems and your human team. And then when you centralize through automation, you don't have to do any of this crazy change management. You can often achieve even better results. And you can also do it one function at a time. So you could choose to eliminate screening as work that the site teams are doing without having to also figure out, okay, what am I going to do about renewals and what am I going to do about maintenance? And there were a lot of reasons, even specific to screening, that made this type of end-to-end automation impossible in the past. So, one really big trend today is that, Silicon Valley-backed venture startups are able to use AI to actually do work end-to-end in your business, and that's a brand new trend and a new type of technology or software, where most technology or software you used to purchase would be like a tool that you would give to your employees to do their job more effectively. So that's one trend that's enabling what we're talking about here. But then going a layer deeper to screening specifically, there are a lot of things about screening that have made it very hard to do this in the past. So one thing is with credit reports, traditionally somewhere between 7 and 15% of the results come back as some sort of conditional, refer, or risk warning. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens, but there's two major buckets. One bucket is the applicant mistyped their date of birth. So it is off with what's supposed to be in the credit bureau. And you need a human there to call that person, ask the applicant what their date of birth is, correct that, and rerun screen. The other bucket are people who are committing fraud, and they're applying with fake SSNs. And then you need to have a team there to try and figure out, okay, is this person committing fraud, or are they just a recent immigrant and they have limited credit history, and therefore this credit report finds that suspicious, but really they just moved here from India. So that's the credit piece. Then there's income verification, and there's been a lot of tools like bank linking technology that you may have interacted with in a consumer app yourselves that make income verification much more efficient than it used to be. But even with the most state-of-the-art tools, the vast majority of income verification tools still leave 20 or 30% of income verifications to be manually reviewed by your team. So you can imagine people who are self-employed, people who have offer letters, people who are maybe retired and need to be approved based on their assets, and the list goes on and on, maybe people with multiple sources of income. And until now, capturing that final 20, 30% with an automated system rather than with a big team of humans wasn't possible. And then in addition to needing to have teams that kind of review credit report warnings and review proof of income documents and benefits letters, you also had to have a team to just communicate with the applicants. So if you had, you asked someone on site, hey, how much time do you spend after you get an application to call people and ask for documents? It's probably going to be on average 2 hours per application. And this is another thing that AI has now made automatable. If anyone in here has played with ChatGPT, they know that these AI bots have now gotten good enough where they can understand something as complicated as underwriting, screening, and then they can automate the communication back and forth with the applicant, so you don't need to have a centralized screening team or site teams, which are partly bank underwriters, but also partly just support to call the applicants to get the needed information. And the final piece that has made this impossible traditionally is fraud has been on the rise across the industry since COVID, and you can no longer rely on the approvals or denials just from the credit system. And many operators have had to either piece together multiple systems, to have one system that's trying to detect fraud in some part of the application, and one system that's doing part of the screening, or just train their teams to try and be investigators. Now, AI has actually enabled companies like ours to solve these problems and actually deliver approvals and denials on 99% of applicants. So rather than, if your goal is to centralize, trying to do this very operationally change management intensive thing where you're maybe getting rid of the assistant manager and hiring 10 people at your corporate headquarters to process rental applications full time to do everything I talked about on the last slide, you can actually just take screening and take a system that is able to handle all of the weird edge cases end to end using AI and an AI chatbot to communicate with applicants, collect any additional information that you might need to get them to an approval denial, and also do the necessary cross-checks to prevent fraud that is very hard to catch. And fraud is one of these things where there's actually many, many, many different types of fraud. So you can imagine someone editing their pay stubs to falsify their income higher, but then there's also cases where somebody is using their brother's social security number because they have bad credit and their brother has good credit, which is called friendly fraud. There are also cases where somebody creates an entirely synthetic identity, so it's just like a name and an SSN and a credit score that And then there are cases where somebody goes and Google's apartment approval package and finds an SSN which actually matches their name, but links to a different credit score in the credit bureaus, and many, many, many more types. You can't prevent all of those things unless you're holistically looking at credit, criminal, income, identity, proof of identity documents, proof of income documents. And when you have these sort of warnings or risk scores, you communicate back and forth with the applicants to collect any missing information you need to actually make the right decision. And if you are able to centralize in this new way, where rather than building a big centralized team, you're just taking the process off of the site teams, there are significant benefits or potential financial upside to your business. One of the major ones is leasing agents are probably on average spending at least 30% of their time on these screening tasks. So if you can take that work entirely off their hands, and it's a job that has on average 25 or 30% attrition, then you can over time increase the ratio of leasing agents to units from maybe 1 in 150 to 1 in 220 or 240 over a year or two after you implement something like this. And that can drive significant reduction in operating expenses in your business. Also, when you have the best fraud prevention, you're able to significantly reduce bad debt. So fraud prevention that's coupled with screening is able to prevent all types of fraud and able to adjudicate and make sense of and get to red light, green light on the hardest cases by communicating with the applicants and gathering more information and cross-checking all of the different data points. You can get, your bad debt from maybe 1.5 or 2% today down to long-run historical averages for institutional multifamily at maybe 0.4, 0.5, or 0.6, which can really, really, really drive NOI higher. And if you combine these two things, usually folks that do this with a system like 2DOTS are able to generate at least $2 million in annual savings per 10,000 units. And then finally, you're able to approve marginal people who otherwise wouldn't be approved when you handle all these edge cases well. So in closing, there's the old way of centralizing functions where you have to build a big new team. And it's complicated, and it takes multiple years, and even though some of your peers have had success with it, it's quite hard. And we believe there's a new way that people can centralize more easily different functions. And we're helping people do that with one of the hardest functions to centralize first, which is screening. Where if you used a system like 2DOTS, we would be able to end-to-end take over the entire process, provide approvals and denials that are fraud-proof on 99% or more of applicants, which drives bad debt lower, occupancy higher, and operating costs lower. So I hope that was helpful for everybody. I think we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, more than happy to answer them. I think someone's walking around with the mic, and then also you can